At the falls of the Ohio, the Earth reveals its own ancient story, a story that reaches back far beyond human existence, 400 million years ago, when warm, shallow seas crept across this land. The face of the Earth looked very different then. The continents would not be in their present positions for hundreds of millions of years. The place that would one day be the falls of the Ohio was the floor of a tropical sea just 20 degrees south of the Earth's equator. The time is known as the Devonian period, sometimes called the Age of Fish. The sea was teeming with life. An amazing variety of corals and stromatopteroids formed massive reef-like barriers that stretched for miles along the edges of the seas. These barriers created domains where hundreds of other species of marine life could thrive. Just as they do today, the ancient marine animals extracted minerals from the seawater, which they transformed into their own protective skeletons. Just as they do today, the marine animals lived for a time, then left their shells and skeletons to collect on the bottom of the sea. Tens of millions of years passed. Layer after layer of bones and shells built up as fine seaborne sediment settled into every crevice and detail. The skeletons of marine animals were covered over. Even the trails of trilobites in the sandy ocean floor were delicately blanketed with layers of silt. Millenniums came and went as the process continued beneath the ever-shifting seas. Where the land was exposed, tiny land plants began to grow. Eventually, there were damp, tropical forests of towering trees. The first amphibians, the Ichthyostega, began to feed on early varieties of insects. Late in the Devonian period, the shallow seas which covered most of the Midwest were choked with floating mats of algae and driftwood. The algae decayed and sank along with the waterlogged driftwood and fine sediment, forming layers of black carbon-rich mud at the bottom of the sea. This would one day become New Albany shale. Again and again, the remains of marine animals and forests were buried by the progressing and regressing seas, layer upon layer, year after year, millions and millions of times over. Under the pressure of the deepening blanket of debris, the remains of ancient sea creatures were slowly transformed into stone. So began the fossils at the falls. On land and in the seas, the pressures of survival spawned new forms of life over the next 350 million years. As the continent continued to heave and move, inching its way north, conditions for survival changed. Plant and animal species adapted or faded into extinction. At the falls, there is no record of this prehistoric drama. The evidence has all been eroded away, if not by wind and rain, then by the scouring which occurred during the Pleistocene epoch, the last great ice age. It began 2.5 million years ago. Incredible glaciers, at least 2 miles thick, covered the northern parts of the continent. As the glaciers spread, vast tonnages of rock and gravel became embedded in the ice. The ice sheets completely reshaped the landscape, creating the vast, flat northern plains and redirecting the flow of rivers. The first two glaciers of the Ice Age extended into present-day Indiana. The third, known as the Illinoisan, spread all the way into present-day Kentucky, carving a deep valley into the earth, a valley known today as the Ohio River Valley. It took thousands of years for the glacier to melt. Oceans of water flooded through the valley, carrying tons of rock and gravel called glacial till. As the floodwaters ran off, the glacial till settled across the bottom of the valley, creating a wide, flat plain known today as the Ohio River floodplain. "20,000 years ago, the last glacier of the Ice Age, the Wisconsin, made its advance. Its leading edge stopped just 60 miles to the north. As the Wisconsin ice cap receded, its waters washed into this valley and drained westward, carving out the path of a powerful river we have come to call the Ohio. For over 10,000 years, the river meandered across the floodplain. Eventually, it settled into a course familiar to us today, where it cut through a ridge of bedrock limestone. And the bodies of ancient sea creatures, now fossilized, glistened in the sun for the first time in over 350 million years. The fossil beds reached from shore to shore. The rapids they created stretched for 2.5 miles down the river. During seasons of low water, migrating herds of mammoth and mastodon could cross over to the salt licks of Kentucky. The animals were followed to the falls by hunters, the first humans to arrive here, just 13,000 years ago. As the years passed and the climate gradually warmed, the tundra-like environment at the falls was replaced by deciduous forests. The area grew rich in wildlife. The river was alive with fish and freshwater mussels. The shallows made a natural sanctuary for waterfowl. Prehistoric people were drawn to the abundant resources of the land and river. Eventually, their communities gave way to more nomadic tribes. These were the people first met by French trappers venturing down from Canada. The falls was one of the few unnavigable sections on the Ohio's 981-mile course. It was a natural stopping point for all who came by river. And this crossroads of natural history became a crossroads for human history as well. In this very old world the Europeans called New, events at the falls began to shape the fate of an emerging nation. From the falls, George Rogers Clark plotted a stunning military campaign to take from England the lands northwest of the Ohio River. At the falls, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark began their famous expedition to explore the Louisiana Purchase. At the falls, John James Audubon made hundreds of sketches for his world-famous wildlife pictures. At the falls, scientists have identified hundreds of species of Devonian fossils, more than at any other single place on Earth. At the falls, cities were born. At the falls of the Ohio, the Earth reveals its own ancient story, and the story has become, in part, our own. This outcropping of stone jutted into the path of a meandering river and into the path of human history, altering its flow and subtly shaping monumental events. Events which continue to affect the lives of all who walk these shores.